The moment that made me the most emotional was probably the very moment that I came through the hatch out of my Soyuz spacecraft and onto the International Space Station for the first time. That moment represented so many years of work and so many of my dreams since the time that I was 5 years old. And I arrived on the International Space Station not only to my colleagues and crewmates, to some of my very close friends and classmates as well that I had started this astronaut program with. It was an incredibly intense moment for me, and I think I had the biggest smile on my face that I've had for my entire life. Throughout the 7 months, that smile almost never left my face. So I would say the next most emotional moment was when I had to depart the space station to come home. My best advice to my 15-year-old self is that it will all be worth it. To remember to work hard, to keep at it and persevere, because in the end, your dreams will actually come true. Sounds quite trite, but for me, my 5-year-old dream job actually ended up coming true, and I was able to launch to space, live on board the International Space Station, and even do 3 spacewalks. The most challenging part in the selection for becoming an astronaut is probably just psychological, and that is all of the stress and all of the pressure that you're putting on yourself. The astronaut selection committee and all of the employees here that we met during the process and throughout the interview process were actually incredibly welcoming and quite calming, but that psychological component, all of that stress that you put on yourself when you're getting ready to interview for this dream job, the moment you've been waiting for your entire life, that I think is the biggest hurdle. Is getting past that mental barrier in order to ensure that you give a true representation of yourself is probably the most challenging part. Having been back on Earth now for about 5 months, I think some of the changes in myself that are remaining, other than the physical ones, are mostly the perspective gained after being in space, floating the entire time, having that incredible perspective looking down at the planet in its entirety with everything below you, all the places you've been, everybody you've ever known, every experience you've ever had down there together, and we're separate from that. It gives you this feeling of perspective in terms of how fragile, how beautiful our planet is, and how we need to protect it. How this thin, tenuous band of an atmosphere. Also, how interconnected everything is on the planet. You see the land masses and the oceans below, and you realize, truly, that we are all in this together, that we are one human, one species. We don't see these geopolitical man-made boundaries that we've imposed upon ourselves, and it's just much simpler to realize that we are one human. I think that perspective will remain with me forever. There are a lot of emotions going on during your first spacewalk. Spacewalks are the riskiest thing that we do as astronauts, and they're also the most challenging thing that we do both physically and mentally. So one of the things that was primarily driving me in the lead up to my first spacewalk was just making sure that I maintained the right level of focus. I was concentrating and very focused on making sure that I had all the tools I needed, going through the actions of everything that we were going to do during the spacewalk in my mind and making sure that I was very well prepared in order to carry out the mission successfully, but also to make sure that I kept myself and my crewmate Christina Cook safe. That was really the overriding feeling leading up to the spacewalk. Then I'll never forget the moment when the hatch opened. Christina was already out of the hatch, and I came out looking down at my feet and seeing nothing between my feet and the earth below, just the void and blackness of space. And it was such an incredible, really awestruck moment for me to be feeling, something I had dreamed about since I was 5 years old. So it was really a time when I felt overcome by everything that was happening. But as astronauts, we have to get ready to get the job done, and so I immediately started carrying out the actions, the first duties and job that we had to do out there, and the muscle memory of all of our years of training kicked in. We made sure to steal a couple of moments to just enjoy the view and appreciate the intensity of what we're doing as well. And I can tell you that seeing the beauty of the Earth from nothing except for your thin visor separating the blackness of space and the earth below. It is truly an awe-inspiring, incredible feeling. It is something that I will never forget. Those spacewalks, particularly that first one, were a definite highlight of the entire mission. Well, there are certainly all of those things: smells, sounds, songs, food items that I associate with being in space. First of all, there actually is a smell of space, and I'm not certain that it's actually a smell of space. I think it's more a smell of the interaction of these metallic surfaces that make up the space station components with the vacuum and with this highly fluctuating temperature and thermal environment in space. But it smells a little bit like hot metal, or kind of like a burnt metal type smell. You smell that very distinctly every time you open or close a hatch to the external environment. So for example, after a docking of a cargo vehicle, once we open up that vehicle and we start unloading things onto the space station, right at that first moment when we open the hatch, we can really smell that smell of space. Same thing from when we come back in from a spacewalk. After we open the inner hatch to the space station, we get out of our spacesuits, we can actually smell that same kind of smell. Sounds, there's actually quite a bit of background noise, white noise on the space station with all of the different components and electrical equipment and hardware that's running on the space station at all times. So there's a lot of that background noise, and I think that kind, if I heard that same whir of all the different machinery, it would instantly kind of transport me back there. For songs, I had some incredible music. I had playlists that several of my friends would send up to me. So there are several songs that do bring me right back there. We spent time hanging out with all of our international crew members, with the Russians, for example, and there was a lot of Russians kind of 80s rock that we like to listen to and dance a little bit with. It's a lot of fun to dance in space. I was even serenaded by my favorite band and had the opportunity to have a little video chat with them in space. So the song that they sang to me is another very special one. And the food items, we have such an incredible diversity of food items on the space station now, ranging from things like Indian fish curry, Turkish fish stew, braised red cabbage, sweet and savory kale, butternut squash, and then there's all the international food. We can trade items with the Russians, sometimes have some European food, so there's incredible variety, and all of those will remind me of being in space. I would want all prospective astronauts to know that it is truly worth it. All the hard work you're putting in, all of the things you're trying to accomplish in order to make these dreams come true, all of it is worth it. It will be difficult at times. You might fail and have to persevere to get through that moment, but I can promise you that that first moment, as soon as you arrive in space, you're weightless and you're looking down at the planet below, all of that is truly worth it. We did pull a few pranks on each other on the International Space Station. We like to make sure that we can keep things light sometimes, maintain our senses of humor, because we are up there working incredibly hard. We can be very busy, and sometimes things can be quite stressful. So we would rely on each other to sometimes lighten it up, play a few jokes. So for example, sometimes before new crew members arrive on the space station, we'll set up their sleeping quarters for them, put up a few pictures, maybe we'll put up some joke signs, some personal jokes coming up from the ground and that kind of thing. I think the most difficult thing when you come back from space is just dealing with gravity again. You can literally feel gravity on you, and it feels like you're being pushed down in your chair, even or when you're standing. Kind of like when an older sibling might put their hand on the top of your head and keep pushing you down. You can literally feel that gravity because you've been up there for many months without it at all, and you can just feel that presence. It makes you feel very tired at first as your body starts adjusting and getting used to that again. And we feel those physical effects, especially in those first few days, but really it takes several weeks before you feel normal again. I'm not sure I have one particular motto, but I think I would say keep smiling. Always remember to keep smiling and to enjoy the moment and appreciate what you're doing at the time. Sometimes I have to remind myself of that as well, because it's very easy to always be thinking about the next thing and the next great thing, and then you don't actually enjoy that present moment of what you're doing then. So I would say keep smiling and remember to enjoy and appreciate the moment. Conducting scientific experiments is one of our primary purposes of operating on board the ISS. We're doing research on things ranging how spaceflight and microgravity affect our human bodies, so physiological and medical experiments, combustion science experiments, even flames burn differently in space, protein crystal growth. You can grow bigger and more pure crystals without the presence of gravity. That can lead to development of certain pharmaceuticals. For example, there's actually a relatively recent Japanese experiment that has led to clinical trials for a new drug for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So these experiments that we're doing on board the International Space Station are not only relevant to the future of space exploration, but they're also relevant to benefiting life back on Earth. One of my favorite experiments during my mission was growing lettuce. We grew Mizuna lettuce on board the International Space Station and did it under two different types of light, two different wavelengths, one more red and one a bit more blue, to evaluate how that affected the crop, and also some differences in the fertilizer in the root mat. We had the opportunity to take care of those plants in space, which was so cool because we had this green, flourishing, living thing up there with us, which is quite a novelty in space. We were taking care of it, watering it every day. And in the end, the best part was that we had the harvest. Now, of course, we had to pack up about half of that to bring back so the scientists on Earth could study it, but we also got to eat half of the crop. So we had some fresh salads in space, which was quite a treat because, of course, fresh fruits and vegetables can be pretty rare up there. Physiologically, we studied the cardiovascular system, so looking at our blood vessels. Previous experiments have shown that the carotid artery, for example, the walls of that blood vessel get thicker and stiffer in space, equivalent to about 20 to 30 years of aging in only a 6-month mission. So all of these things are very important for us to understand in order to make sure that we can keep our astronauts healthy for these missions and for future, even longer duration missions. One of these experiments looked at liver disease and studying how circadian rhythms, the light and dark cycles that we naturally have here on Earth, how do those affect the human body and our physiology, specifically in relation to liver disease. We also studied mighty mice in space. These mice were actually genetically engineered and or were given a target therapeutic treatment in order to inhibit myostatin. Now, myostatin is a natural inhibitor to muscle growth. So if you inhibit that system, then you can have some increases in both bone density and muscle mass. This has a lot of important effects for future astronauts on long-duration missions in order to maintain the health of our bones and muscles, but also for disease states back on Earth. There are several different disease states involving bone and muscle degeneration that may benefit from these kind of therapies that we demonstrated in space. And this was such an interesting experiment. The mice that had this treatment actually were able to maintain their bone density and muscle mass relative to the control groups. So pretty interesting findings, and this study has already been published in the journal PNAS. My favorite space food, that is a difficult one because the variety of foods that we have up there right now are so diverse. I would say one of my favorite breakfast foods was actually just oatmeal with almond milk. That tasted so good to me up there. We had a lot of new foods that our NASA Food Laboratory has been developing as well, and some of those are incredibly delicious. I would say the Indian fish curry and the Turkish fish stew were among my favorites, as well as the butternut squash and the sweet and savory kale. I would say my two favorite space books are The Right Stuff and Man on the Moon. Absolutely. I would love to be on a mission to Mars once we have a way to get us there and bring our astronauts back safely, and that is in the future. Right now, we're working on the Artemis mission to send the first woman and the next man back to the surface of the moon and eventually to go on to Mars. I would be so excited to play a role in those missions. My best advice would be, first of all, you need a degree in a STEM field, so focus on that science, technology, engineering, and math, but make sure that you're doing what it is that you are truly passionate about. I think that is the only way to excel, and more importantly, to make sure that you're happy in the end result. My definition of a strong woman is someone that has confidence, and someone that has that steadfast determination in understanding what it is that they truly want and working their hardest to get there. Not being overcome by caring too much about what everyone else is doing and what everybody else thinks, but focusing on what is in front of you and doing your best to make those things come true. There are so many wonderful things about our jobs as astronauts. I think for me, even on the ground, one of the best aspects of the job is that we're always doing something different. We're not just sitting at a desk doing the same thing every day. One day for our training, we might be in the spacesuit training underwater. The next day, we might be learning about an International Space Station system. The next day, we might be flying a jet or taking a Russian language lesson. So everything is incredibly diverse, and a lot of these things are also really active, and they engage both your mind and your body. And that is always the time when I feel the most content. The best part of being an astronaut, though, is going to space. Having just had that opportunity, I returned about 5 months ago from a 7-month mission on board the International Space Station, and every moment I spent up there experiencing weightlessness, looking down on the planet below. I wouldn't trade any of that for the world, and that's absolutely the best part of the job. The worst part of the job? That's tough. Like anything, of course, there are challenges, and there are good and bad things to anything that you do. I would say one of the challenging things about being an astronaut is the amount of time it takes. It's a lot of hard work to get there. That's not a bad thing, though, because it can be incredibly rewarding for anything that you're doing when you're working hard and putting in a lot of effort. And those things actually lead to the best result. When you're putting in that effort, when you're facing those challenges, that's when things are even more rewarding in the end. That's an interesting question. One thing that we do actually have to give up when we accept this job to become an astronaut are our previous careers. So that can actually be a little bit bittersweet. I was working as a scientist, studying the physiology of animals in extreme environments, studying emperor penguins in the Antarctic, or elephant seals in California, or high-altitude birds like the bar-headed goose. And I loved my job as a scientist, working in the field with animals and exploring the world and these natural curiosities. That's sort of the bittersweet thing. When you get offered this job after applying to be an astronaut, your dream comes true, this dream that I had since I was 5 years old to become an astronaut. But I did have to give up this other career that I also found to be so fulfilling. So that is one thing that I did have to give up for this job. The last day on the ISS was very emotional for me because I simply wasn't ready to leave yet. Even though I had been there for 205 days, almost 7 months, I wanted to stay longer. There were still so many things that I wanted to do, and it's such a unique opportunity, everything that you experience up there. It went by so quickly for me because we were so busy during the entire time. So it was a difficult day for me in realizing that I was leaving. But the thing is, you have a lot of different tasks that you have to accomplish, things you need to take care of, get out of the way for the other people that will be arriving. So you're pretty focused on just completing those tasks. Overall, though, it was quite emotional, and I was very, very sad when that hatch closed and I knew that I was leaving. Simple fact, we don't do laundry. We don't actually have a means of washing our clothes on the space station, so we wear clothes for a certain amount of time, and then we actually throw those clothes away and take new ones. My dream mission would be to be on one of these first missions going back to the moon. I would love to walk on the surface of the moon, and that is actually what I dreamed about from the time I was a kid. In first grade, when I was asked what I wanted to be when I grew up, I drew a picture of an astronaut standing on the surface of the moon. So hopefully I will be able to be involved in the Artemis missions when we do exactly that in some way, whether it's here on the ground or hopefully up there on the moon. Coming back to Earth in a spacecraft is an incredibly dynamic and exciting process. After you undock from the space station and do your deorbit burn so that you can safely re-enter back through the atmosphere, when you're passing through the atmosphere, you are literally burning up with the drag and the density of the atmosphere around you. So out of the window, you can actually see this orange flame around you, this plasma layer as you're coming through. Then there's another very dynamic time when your parachute deploys. And that feels like being in a washing machine. You can't even describe all of the different motions that are imparted on you in every direction. After that, you're falling down the parachutes, getting ready to eventually hit the ground in what we call a soft landing. The Russian Soyuz spacecraft that I flew in does land in the middle of Kazakhstan. So we had some thrusters that fired just before we hit the ground in order to offset some of that momentum. And then we hit with a thud, and there it is, you're on Earth. And it's a little bit shocking because you're so used to being in microgravity. And suddenly you literally feel gravity. You feel like you're being pushed down in your seat. Then the hatch opens, the search and rescue team is there to help pull you out, and it is a very abrupt transition back to Earth. You're used to only seeing 2 or maybe 5 other people throughout the entire mission, and suddenly there's the whole world. For us, it was also an incredibly interesting time because, of course, we returned right in the middle of the pandemic, and everybody that greeted us was wearing a mask, and that was something that we weren't really used to. So that was something that we had to deal with as well. It's definitely possible as a female astronaut to have both a family and also our career. It can be more challenging, of course, because if we are pregnant, then we can't do some of the aspects of our job. We can't fly in an airplane or dive in the MBL in our suit. But if you plan these things in the right amount of time, it is possible to do both. And there are several examples in the office of that, of women that do have both children and a family and still are incredible astronauts with a flourishing career. Like for any other demanding career, it is something that requires personal decisions and also the right balance, but it is definitely possible. I didn't actually feel scared or any kind of physical fear in space, but I think that's something that I don't really experience anywhere on Earth either. For me, it's what a lot of other astronauts say. The one fear that we have as astronauts in space is the fear of making a mistake. You know that so much hard work went into everything that we're doing, not just on our own account, but on so many different people on the ground, so many people on the ground team that have helped us get here and are so involved in everything that we're doing in building the space station and in functioning the space station. So you don't want to let them down. It's this incredible responsibility that you feel. So you want to focus on that and make sure that you don't make a mistake that could jeopardize any of that. On the International Space Station, we're about 250 miles above the Earth. We are orbiting the planet every 90 minutes. So that means we have about 16 sunrises and sunsets per day. We're constantly cycling back and forth between night and day, between complete darkness and complete light in the sun. So if we're near a window, you can very easily see whether it's light or whether it's dark. But we don't actually have windows in all the modules. So the answer is we just tell the difference just like you do here on Earth, using a watch, using a clock, and we work on GMT, so Greenwich Mean Time, which is basically what time it is in London. And we operate just like you do down here. We have our normal work day, and then we have a period of time before sleep, and then our standard sleep time. Another thing that we do, we have lights that have different settings on them so that we can help regulate our circadian rhythms. You know, we don't have that normal day light cycle that you have down here on Earth, which our bodies are very entrained to. So what we can do is make the lights really bright during the morning to help wake us up, and then we can turn them down a little bit after lunch, and then even further down during that pre-sleep period to help mimic some of that natural sunlight that helps our body maintain those patterns. That's a difficult one, but I think even if you're in a country with no astronaut program, you never know what's going to happen. We actually have new countries developing space programs all the time. For example, on my mission, I actually launched with the very first astronaut from the United Arab Emirates. He probably didn't grow up thinking it was a realistic thing for him to become an astronaut as well, but now he's been to space. So I would say stay the course and pursue your dreams. Plants actually grow in the same way in space in that they grow toward their light source. So we have some different methods of engineering in order to contain the fertilizer and in order to deliver water in the microgravity environment, but it's still possible to grow plants on the International Space Station. As a matter of fact, we grew Mizuna lettuce during our mission and even got to harvest about half of it to have as fresh salads. Like anything worthwhile, it is a challenging process and there are a lot of struggles involved in becoming an astronaut. But when you feel discouraged, you just have to try to look past that and remember the goal. And remember that it will be worth it in the end. I think for me, when I had those moments feeling discouraged, I reached out to my family members and my close friends, and they were always the first to encourage me and to remind me of what was important, and that really helped me push through. I first started saying I wanted to be an astronaut when I was 5 years old, and I maintained that and said it all throughout the rest of my life. Actually, I never was a huge Star Trek person. I really didn't watch that growing up. Did watch Star Wars, though, so I would say Star Wars over Star Trek for me. For me, I would say the liftoff, because that was the moment that I knew my dream was coming true. I was riding a rocket to go to space for the first time. Coming back down to Earth, which wasn't a splashdown for me since I didn't land in the ocean. I flew in the Russian Soyuz spacecraft and we land on land, so it was hitting the ground instead of splashing down in the ocean. But for me, that part meant I was coming home and I wasn't ready to do that yet. So for me, it was a much more exciting process in getting to space. This is a question from Avi. Thanks, Avi, for this question. Mars has captivated us as humans for decades, for hundreds of years now, from early philosophers to science fiction writers. So I would love to be on a mission to Mars one day, but I think the most realistic destination would be going to the moon. That would be my ultimate dream spot right now, is to be on one of those first missions returning to the moon. That is a tricky question and one that I would have to give a lot of thought. So I'm not sure I'm ready to answer that question right now. But if you have any good ideas, please let me know. Well, some of the basic guidelines are that you need a degree in one of the STEM fields, so science, technology, engineering, or math. And to become a NASA astronaut, you need to be an American citizen. But of course, there are many other space programs as well in their respective countries. The other big piece of advice is to make sure that you're doing the thing that you are most truly passionate about. I truly believe that is the only way to be the best at what you do and to truly excel, and most importantly, to be happy in the end. For us as astronauts, we train for years before going to space. So we are very well trained. We know exactly what to do for all the different technical aspects of our job. We're very familiar with all of that. But one of the things that you can't train for or really understand how it's going to feel is that sustained microgravity itself, being weightless all the time. And it's interesting, when we arrive on the space station, we say it's kind of like being a newborn. The first things that you have to do are just get used to the simple daily tasks that you don't even think about on Earth, like how to eat, how to go to the bathroom, how to get water and drink, how to just take care of all of your things. All those things are really different. And although I knew it was going to be that way, nothing can really prepare you for how it feels. I was also almost awestruck by how incredible everything felt, every moment just feeling weightless. It was even more incredible than I had ever imagined. So that was something that I was even more surprised about than I thought I would be. When you are looking out the window and looking back toward Earth and then looking at the vastness and the void of the blackness of space around you, seeing all the stars, seeing the Milky Way, it really does leave you with this different perspective of how large the solar system and the universe truly are, how insignificant you are as a human, how insignificant really the entire planet is. And I think that's a very worthwhile perspective for us. It's very easy for us as humans to get caught up in the trivial things in life, on the thing that's right in front of you, which might be superficial or maybe not that important in the long run. But it's important to take that step back and to gain that perspective of where we are as humans, that we are all together here on this planet, living and working together, and how insignificant truly our roles are in the grand scheme of the solar system and the universe. That is very easy to see when you experience that perspective from space, and I think it's something that truly does change you as a person. There are a lot of different smells on the ISS, and a lot of them are similar to smells down here on Earth. You can smell when somebody's preparing their food. You can smell somebody maybe when they're getting a little bit sweaty during an exercise session. There's the smell of space, or at least the smell of the interaction of the metallic space structure surfaces with the radiation and thermal environment. That does have this distinct smell, kind of like a hot or burnt metal smell. Lots of different smells, huge variety, just like down here on Earth. But the one smell that you don't have is the smell of things growing, the smell of life. And that's something that you notice when you come back. It's something that I noticed before coming back from working a season in the Antarctic or coming out of a mission in a cave. When you don't have that background smell that you smell every day here on Earth, it's just really of life, of things growing, of the humidity in the atmosphere. You notice that when you come back from one of these environments. And it's this really distinct smell, but only after a few minutes it's actually lost again in the background of everything. But it's really interesting to experience that. We listen to all types of music in the ISS. Indie rock is kind of my preferred genre, so I was listening to a lot of that while I was working or exercising, but people were listening to all types, including lots of different international varieties from our Russian partners, from our UAE astronaut, representing all of our different unique musical tastes. We also have a lot of instruments on board the ISS. I flew my piccolo, there's a saxophone up there that I played, we have a guitar, a keyboard, various percussion instruments. So we actually played our own music too. We would have a few band practices every now and then. We even serenaded the ground with some Christmas music at one time. So it's fun to play our own music up there too. The first thing that you need is a degree in the STEM field, so science, technology, engineering, math, and make sure that you're pursuing what it is you're truly passionate about. Another very important component is even a new buzzword we've created here at NASA called expeditionary skills. But really, it's just what your parents tell you or what you tell your children and how to play nicely in others. These things are so important for long-duration missions like those that we have on the International Space Station. Aspects like teamwork, working well with other people, leadership, followership, good communication strategies.
Jessica was the best crewmate ever. Did I say that right?
Absolutely, Drew. My colleague and friend and crewmate for my entire mission, Drew Morgan.